everyone. You'll notice a couple of things in the Zoom chat. I'm trying to see if, because we have some people who have not filled out the pre-survey as yet. So Tadiwa, I don't know if you're in on this. Yes, Tadiwa, you're in on this call. If you could please make sure that you fill out the pre-survey. In fact, you should have done it before we had all these meetings. But when you fill it out, please just make sure to not reference essentially anything that has occurred during the meetings. What you're trying to do is to account for what you knew before these trainings, so that we can ask you the same questions after the training meetings, so that we can get a sense of what impact that the trainings have had on your knowledge about family and citizen diplomacy. So anyway, so does anybody have any questions about the surveys, the pre and post surveys, before we jump into other things? Okay, so I just want to emphasize the pre-surveys. You should fill that out if you haven't already. And it's really important for us to be able to measure the impact of these trainings on your knowledge development, and hence why we're encouraging you to fill it out if you haven't already. I think the vast majority of you have, according to our records. And so today, I think, May, you're tracking attendance, and great. And then Jenna Lynn is tracking participation. So, and this, by the way, for those of you who are interns of Learning Life, keep in mind that if you want to get participation with honors, that chiming in, whether through the Zoom chat or vocally, in other words, spoken word, is good, because that's how you're going to be able to essentially get honors, is by not just attending but participating in the meetings. Okay, so welcome everybody. This is the last of the meetings that we're having focused on family. Sadly enough, next Sunday we start talking about citizen diplomacy, so a different topic, but because we're about family diplomacy, we have to talk about family first. That's more fundamental. And then so next week I will actually be kind of leading the training with some basic conversation about power and citizen diplomacy in the world, which I hope will be of interest to you, but it'll be quite different from what we're discussing now. We are finishing today with conversation around, particularly around globalization and its impact on families. And that includes conversation about migration. So Denise and Bethany are going to be starting things off, and then Sangeeta is going to be finishing things off. So you might remember them from last time, and so I'm going to let them start.
Thank you. And today I have internet, and I'm in my space, and I'm at the end of my COVID isolation. So it's all good. Let me see if I can share my screen. We're going to start with a review and tying things up. All right, does everything look cool to you guys?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so once again, welcome to our discussion on family diplomacy and on family in preparation for you guys to become family diplomats. and to actively find ways to improve the lives of people around the world. That's a really cool thing. In our first meeting, we attempted to define family, only to discover that it's pretty complex. And there are different nuances over what is family. And some of these nuances are very, very important because they influence our laws, they influence our policies, whichever country we live in. We briefly touched in the first time that we met on the nuclear family. What's thought of as parents and children, it's thought of as the predominant family form. We also talked about extended family, blended families, polygamous families. The nuclear family has for a long time been considered universal, but because of so many variations in roles and family organizations, such as matrilineal, which is systems of kinship based on mom, and patrilineal systems of kinship based on fathers, it's probably better to use the word or the phrase nuclear family complex, so that can take in a whole lot of groups. Then last week, we attempted to introduce demography, which is a study of changes in human populations. Bethany?
Yeah, remembering that last week makes me laugh. We got to talk about various changes in family that we measure using demography, looking at changes in numbers, for example, of single parent families, changes in marriage, cohabitation, divorce, aging populations, even changes in literacy. We also looked into population size, whether or not there's too much, too little, just right, and even what that means and what might impact that. And we got to play around a little bit with population pyramid website and see some of the variations across countries and really consider what that means for family policy, for needs, for different communities and different countries. And so looking at whether, for example, there's a lot of children compared to the rest of the population, which can impact things like healthcare, housing, education, employment. We looked at some countries where we saw there were fewer children compared to the rest of the pyramid, which can cause issues related to industry, economy, aging adults and supporting aging adults, and even touches on things related to continuing cultures and countries. So we saw that these population pyramids can differ from around the world and help us understand how birth rates and gender and number of children and other age groups can be impacting not just society, but then the policies that we might be working towards.
We also found out that people who they're having fewer kids being born, they're having a difficult time increasing those numbers of children. We don't know why. It seems to be something that's very complex. I have my own theories, but we don't have time to get into those theories. And then introduced the concept of routines and traditions, which led to the question. I kind of overheard it as the internet was fading and I was fading, and that is why? Why talk about these things? For us as family scientists, we put families under a microscope. We're not only interested in what's happening outside of families, like culture, society, economy, environment, war, violence, but also what's happening on the inside of families and how all the outside affects the insides and how the insides affect the outsides. So think of it this way. Many disciplines can study the elephant, and they can come up with all sorts of interesting information related to the size of its ears, the thickness of its skin, the social patterns of elephants. There's even a famous poem about the blind man and the elephant, where each person touched a different part of the elephant and saw something different. So one person thought an elephant was like a tree leg, another thought it was like a snake. And he was holding the ear. They each had a different view of the elephant. And this is the same thing that we have for family. Different disciplines study family, and they study it in different ways. Family scientists are interested in all the parts. We're interested in the outsides, but also interested in the insides to an extent that most of the other disciplines aren't. We want to understand family in all its glory and in all its ugliness. We need to understand what's going on. Now, I want you to think for a minute. Do any of you have a good or had a good relationship with your mother? Did any of you have a good relationship with your mother? I see Paul going, yeah, okay. Well, Paul, could your mother, without saying a single word, give you a look and you would know what you should be doing or should not be doing?
Yes. And by the way, my mother happens to be in on this call, I believe. So she might be very amused that we're suddenly the focus of conversation here. So
Okay. Well, that's the kind of stuff. Bethany, were you saying something?
I was just going to say, so that's why the hand had to go up.
Well, and that's kind of the things that we're interested in. Somebody else could see that same look at your mother that your mother would give you and not have any idea that she has just stricken you to your heart. Okay. This is the insides of family. These are the things that connect us. And so we're interested in how these relate to strengthening families and bringing families together. We call these family processes. So Bethany and I, we have this whole entire textbook on family processes. We don't have time to go over family processes, but related to family processes are traditions, routines, and rituals. They're both related to each other. These traditions, routines, and rituals provide a window into your family's identity. So it not just your personal identity, but your family has an identity. Whether your family is a type of family that says, we get things done no matter what, that is your family identity. And because you have that identity, it influences how you treat each other, and it influences how you interact with the world. So, what do rituals and routines do for families then? Well, they connect us in invisible ways. You don't even realize you're being connected. This feeling of home, being comfortable around each other, feelings of hope, emotional bonds, memories, family narratives. We have stories of our families that we carry with us, stories of our ancestors that we often carry with us. And our research shows that those young people who know their ancestors and know these stories end up being healthier and living happier lives. Rituals and routines also support us. Again, in invisible ways, we get socialized. We learn our culture. We learn our values. Now, some of us might not accept all of our family values as we get older, but we are initially brought into these family values. Routines and rituals also help us to attain our goals as a family, because family scientists believe that all families have goals. You don't realize what those goals are because, again, most of this stuff is invisible. You have to know what you're looking for to understand this. But family scientists have found that routines and rituals are particularly important for 7 family goals. One is creating emotional ties. Let me introduce you to my mother and 2 of my grandchildren. My mother has since passed. She is no longer on this earth. But while she was with us, we spent once a week at least bringing the grandchildren, which were her great-grandchildren, to her house. They heard her speak Polish. They danced with her. They ate with her. They heard stories of their mom and dad and of their grandma and grandpa. And this connected, this results in ties in families. So this simple ritual of having a weekly dinner, and it's recommended that families have at least 3 weekly dinners, had an important impact, not only on my mother's lives, but on my grandchildren who still remember Granny to this day. Bethany.
Well, I'm just looking at Paul's comment about science showing that family stories have a positive impact on kids' behavior. And that's a whole like passion area of mine, and knowing those stories and helping create narratives among our children and ourselves, right? We can have similar stories or experiences, but then turning that into a narrative and how we fit that into our identities is really impactful. And as we look at the things that traditions and rituals do, I think you'll see a lot of how we're creating narratives and stories and understandings of not just our own generation, but then also our ancestors and future. It's kind of all the time travel all in one place, right? Past, present, and future comes into our families. And so I think that's really important to keep in mind how we're creating stories as we go through these rituals, traditions, and routines. So sorry to kind of, oh, we've got hands. Okay, let's do some hands. Leroy.
Yeah, I want to ask a question.
Go for it.
All right. So if I have a family where some people hold onto their tradition and the other people are Westerner, because they are Westerner, people who hold onto the tradition believe that they are not part of the family, and they are calling for DNA tests and other stuff that Western people can do. So excluding the other members from the family. So what should I do in order to unite such family together?
Oh, those are big, giant questions. We're going to touch a little bit on that actually in a couple of slides. So maybe we can loop back around to that in a few slides, Denise?
Yes, in fact, what you're going to find that if you continue to participate in certain rituals and routines with those family members, you're likely to bring families together. There was another question, Bethany?
Yes, and somehow I made everybody disappear on my,
Okay.
I pinned you and now I can't see the hands.
Now I want you to notice this picture. This is my son, and he is asking his future wife at the time for her hand in marriage. And he folded 1,000 cranes for her, and he took her to her favorite sushi restaurant and arranged for the sushi chefs to put 1,000 cranes on all the little plates that went around in front of her. And then he pulled off these cranes, and then he got on his knees after 1,000 had been there and asked for her hand in marriage. Now there is a story that will always be remembered by him and his wife, that'll be told to the children, a story that was the beginning of a membership change. And these rituals that we do help us deal with the fact that my son is now going off to his own family and creating his own family, and that his wife is leaving her family to create a new family together. So these rituals, like marriages, for example, help to help with these membership changes. Okay.
We have a hand. I found it. Beltina.
Bettina?
Yeah, thank you. I'll turn my video off. My internet is not so good, so I'll keep speaking. Could you go back to the I think is the previous slide?
That one?
Right. Yeah. So as you're speaking, as you're adding more information here, which is, I mean, my mind is blown, right? There's so much to unpack. Just I'm caught up between the story that you just said, and the word healthy here. And so I'm really curious, and I'm sure we'll cover this, so I'll just be short about it. But so I really wonder about, I'm really captured by that, right? The word healthy, as I said, but also I'm wondering, you know, when we don't have these things, right?
Yep. And I'm
Have
actually going to touch on that.
these things, what happens to us, which is, I think, a point I brought up last. And so I'll just finish for that. But then I was also wondering, you know, I was thinking a lot since last Sunday, I was thinking a lot the difference between traditions and rituals versus routines. And so I think also this one is connected to last Sunday, where I asked, I think Bethany said something related to this, where I said, hey, it seems pretty important that, for example, as we grow, we learn through family, for example, how do I dress? What is appropriate? How do I eat? When do I eat? What should I eat? What is the proper way to say goodbye? What is the things to say when someone dies, right? So these, it seems like I'm changing my mind and I'm thinking, because, you know, traditions and rituals, for example, me, I'm originally from Albania. I could easily pick up those from, let's say, Albanian communities, or reading more about them and practicing them through extended family members and so on. But then routines, if I'm eradicated from a family, right, then how do I do that? It's a big burden, right? So anyways, and so when these things are missing, or when we have them and they're not healthy, then here's another door opening, and so forth. Just wanted to make that comment. Thank you.
Okay, that's an excellent comment. And we actually touch on that. I'm trying to focus on the healthy side. We're going to be talking a little bit about the unhealthy side and talking a little bit about ways to change it. Now, unfortunately, we only have 45 minutes total to get everything, including getting us to globalization and how that influences us and how people get cut off, like you have experienced, Beltina. So, but I'm glad that you're starting. And I think this is what I see with my students is suddenly they start going, oh my gosh, me getting up on Saturday mornings to do clean the house day actually was meaningful. It had an impact on me in ways I didn't even realize. So we see that these routines and rituals help us deal with membership changes so that we can change things gracefully. And, you know, there are some things like in the United States that we don't do. Bethany has adopted 2 children. And I believe Joe, are you there, Joe? Has also adopted children. And what do we have? You know, when a baby is born, you have all sorts of baby parties and all sorts of things. You have naming rituals and things like that. But often in a foster adopt situation, you get a child and the judge says the child is now yours. And there's very little ritualization. Imagine how we can improve relationships if we start including ritualization. I know a man who loved a woman who had children from a previous relationship, and he decided to marry her. And he had her and her kids there. He got down on his knee and said, will you marry me? And he gave rings to the children as well. He said, I'm not only marrying your mother, I'm marrying you. We will be a family. And to recognize these children, to then bring them into a relationship is, I think, kind of important, and we often ignore that. Family rituals are also good for healing. Bethany, you go ahead and take this one.
Okay, so in this picture, it's a great example, I think, of a healing family ritual. So this is an example of a picnic at a gravesite, part of Dia de los Muertos, where you go and you remember loved ones who have passed. And I mean, death is a really interesting topic in terms of family rituals and the different ways that we do or do not, I think, sometimes interact with that experience. And so all periods of conflict and grief can be touched on through family rituals and family routines that help us to deal with them. And every family is going to experience time where they need healing. I mean, that's a huge part of family families and the things that we go through together as families. And so these rituals can give us a way to help that healing, to help give us a place where we can, it gives us something to do, a way to express and to feel and have that space available to us to deal with the conflict, with pain, with grief, with loss, with reconciliation, even things like retirement, right? That having these rituals and routines together can help us process some of these difficult things.
Family rituals also are important for identity definition and redefinition. Not just identity definition of the individual, but identity definition of the family. Do you see yourself as a religious family? You went to church every Sunday or every Saturday, or not? In the upper left-hand corner is a young lady going through the Apache sunrise ceremony when she has her first period. I think I told you last week, when she menstruates for the first time. Her family calls all the people in her community, and they all come together that weekend, and they have a big ritual bringing her into adulthood and changing her role from child to adult, but at the same time telling her, you are an Apache woman, which can be very important and very impactful for her. So it's interesting, in the United States, we have many people coming here from many different countries, and many of these people continue to stay connected to the places they came from. They're here in the United States and we have New Year's, but they want to celebrate Chinese New Year's. And so they will celebrate Chinese New Year's here. It helps them to stay connected to their identity. Rites of passage. Rituals help us with a rite, which means a ritual of passage. We don't have a whole lot in the United States, unfortunately. The Apache sunrise ceremony is a rite of passage. A funeral is actually a ritual of passage, going from this earth maybe to the other side. So rituals help us with rites of passage. Bethany?
Okay, I'm trying to, I copied your comment, Joe, or Leroy, sorry, for future conversations here, so I don't lose it in there. Okay, so also rituals and routines, they help us find, they help us discuss and understand meaning and purpose. There's all these interesting conversations I'm getting. I'm reading the chat, and
we decided today that we're just going to kind of power through these slides and then try to get to some discussion.
Sorry, I'm sorry if I'm distracting you. I don't mean, I'm trying to use the Zoom so I don't distract you.
But I love this stuff as I'm seeing the conversation about how we tell our stories. They either do or do not create boundaries and distancing boundaries, I think, right? And it's how we craft those stories. And that's part of a family identity and part of a family meaning and purpose, all builds into how we tell these stories. I look at how when we adopted our children, I mentioned this before, where our boundary for family was. And that was part of our communication of values to our children, with that includes these people now, right? We have this very wide range. And so again, everything we talk about when we talk about families and family processes, it's this two-sided, I don't know if it's a two-sided coin, if that's the right way to say it, that you've got the best and the worst that happens in families. And so you've got the best opportunities to have welcoming boundaries, and Joe or Leroy, like you said, to unite a family with different traditions and kind of religious beliefs or levels. Those family stories can either create those boundaries that really divide that, or allow us to bring it all together. And sometimes I think it takes time and some of these practices that then create that story. I mean, sometimes the story creates the practices, and sometimes the practices help us create the stories that are more inclusive, I think. And I think I could get totally off topic here and just talk about that, but I love that. And so, and sometimes it's those little things that we do that can help start creating those stories and kind of the vocabulary of how we understand things. I'm reading more comments. Yes, that's true. And so I love that, Belle, about how it can relate to who we are versus what we are not, and how we do those definitions. creating memories, developing important skills, enhance family connections. Yes, love it. What's also cool though, and so, this is totally off topic, like we were talking about unhealthy families and all of that, you had asked that question while we were on a slide of my grandmother with her picture, and she came from some horribly unhealthy experiences and family experiences that she had. And I look at that though, and even those stories have become part of my narrative and the things that she overcame. And we can get into how she overcame those without having some of those healthy family, all these things that we're talking about, rituals, routines, traditions, and behaviors. But she did. We have a hand, Esma.
I was just like wondering, just want to bring example from Georgia. You have mentioned funerals and generally like rituals and traditions related to like how we bury people. And it used to be that you were supposed to hold the dead for like few days after the death, and then while this happened, like throughout the day, you're supposed to hold your doors open and people come in and like say their sorrows, and like women were expected to cry all the time and be, you know, in this grieving emotional state. And now more and more people really don't want to do this and try to close up their homes and don't have larger funerals either, and not even wear the like the grieving clothes after a close family member dies. And I mean, maybe do you think that these really, when these traditions fall out of, let's say, habit, do you think it's because, let's say, there is no more need for them somehow, like they don't fit into the context anymore?
Is such a great question. It's a huge, giant, complex question. And we'll touch on this, I think, a little bit as we talk about globalization and how that can be impacting things. And as we're exposed to some of these other ways of doing things, I think that can change what we do. We also have changes in our routines and traditions because of changes. There are reasons, changes in need can be a reason for that. But I think it's bigger than that. Usually changes in need will be, I think, on a different level. I'm also seeing a question
from Agi Otto.
I'm also seeing Leroy, so we got it. Let's do Leroy after that.
And Esma.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Good evening.
Hello.
I am Adeoto Chiruni, Apartheid, Nigeria. So I want to make a contribution on rituals from my perspective, from where I come from in Oberland, Nigeria. So where I come from, there is usually a distinction between a good death and a bad death in terms of deaths and rituals. So a good death, a person who doesn't live till ripe old age, who dies premature or not up to old age, is described to have died a bad death. And someone who lives up to like 80-something, 90-something, is described to have lived a good life and died a good death. And so people who died bad deaths are buried differently or in a different fashion. Yes, from people who died good deaths. For example, like someone who drowned, probably in a pool or in a river, is said to have died a bad death and is buried right there close to the river. He is not brought home because of the fear of infecting the community. So a person who died that kind of death is buried just there close to the river. And someone who died of some kind of illnesses like epilepsy or some other illnesses is said to have died a bad death also. So people who die good deaths are people who have children to succeed them, who live good lives, who were good and contributed to the society and really lived and were really morally upright. So it's only these people who died good deaths that are said to be ancestors where I come from. So people who died bad deaths are not ancestors. Yes, so this is my perspective.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I happen to be really interested in death. I've written on it, especially cross-cultural. And again, it gets us into understanding families and things that, for example, governments might step in, not really understanding some of these rituals that are so important to us. I have 5 more minutes, so I'm going to try to race through these really quick, and then we'll turn the time over to our next speaker. And hopefully at the end, we can ask some more questions. Rituals and routines help us deal with really important things in life, like the meaning and purpose of life, what is injustice. They help us deal with shared meanings and values, the origins of life, the purpose of existence, the role of the sacred, the possibility of life after death. What are the challenging concerns that families have? They encompass both sides of contradictions, the wins and the losses, for example, that we see in wedding ceremonies. And then the 7th goal that rituals and routines help us is in order and predictability. They create a sense of home, comfort, routines such as preparing and eating meals, leaving and returning home, dressing in an acceptable way, having a favorite chair to relax in at the end of the day. This provides a sense of continuity. I look at this couple on the right, and there's just a comfort there. This is the way things are. There is peace. That is an important part of life. So rituals and routines have been found to strengthen families. They've been found to improve things such as academic achievement, relationships, but as Valtina says, they are not inherently healthy. They are not inherently facilitating. They can be unhealthy and destructive if families aren't wise in the way that they're created or the way that they're carried out. We even have found, research has suggested, we don't want too many rituals and routines, and we don't want too few rituals and routines. There's got to be kind of a sweet spot. We also need to adapt them as we age and as our children change and as circumstances change. So for those of you who celebrate Christmas, in the United States, Christmas for children is a huge thing. They get lots and lots of gifts. By the time they're 17 or 18, we're giving them a gift card. Things change. And how we do that ritual changes. We also need to make sure that we don't use rituals and routines to manipulate family members. And sometimes I see this especially with college-age students as their parents are trying to learn how to let go. It's been said that if you want to destroy a family, and there are people in this world who believe that we need to do that. We need to change families and what family means and that kind of thing. And if you want to do that, then you destroy family rituals, because that is one way to destroy a family. Disconnect families from their rituals. Give them all their own iPhones. So instead of sitting and talking together over dinner, they're all looking at their own iPhones. Another way to destroy family rituals is by cutting people out. And this is kind of what I think Leroy is kind of addressing. We call this dismemberment in the biz. But when we cut people out of our families, sometimes there might be a good reason. Rarely, though, it's, somebody borrowed money, they didn't pay it back, or I just don't like them. We can destroy family rituals. We can also destroy family rituals by making sure there are times of contention. Anytime that the family gets together, there's an argument, there's a fight, somebody gets arrested, whatever. And that pretty soon people will say, I never want to go to another Thanksgiving dinner again. I never want to go to church again. All it was screaming and yelling to get ready. We can also destroy rituals by fragmenting them. Essentially, this means reinventing them every year so that nobody really knows what the ritual is. And finally, we can trivialize them. We can remake them, We can commercialize them. We can materialize them. We can televise them. Look how many reality shows are on TV now and what that is doing to the way we see life. Trivialization. I have this picture here because in the United States, a part of the wedding ritual at the end was an exchange of food where the husband feeds a piece of cake to the wife feeds a piece of cake to the husband. So both spouses essentially are saying, we are now going to serve each other in our future lives. This is the beginning. And now look what we've done. The funnier it is, the better. The more we wipe it over the face, the better. We have lost all meaning of a lot of these rituals, so that people, nowadays, there are people who get married, and it used to be that it was a time for family to come together and support the couple. But now people are saying, we want to go to a destination wedding, so we're going to go over to Bangkok. Please send us some money so we can go, and we'll send you a picture. We have changed the whole meaning of what commitment is and what family support is, because we have trivialized this ritual. So it shouldn't surprise us that fewer people are getting married and more people are cohabitating. And speaking of cohabitating, Bethany said she wonders if we'd have more success in cohabitating relationships if there was some ritualization behind that, but we don't have time to talk about that. Globalization, I think, is another way that family rituals are being changed and sometimes destroyed. Globalization is that the world has become more interconnected and more interdependent. So this is a result of trade, government policies, exchanges, education, technology. The type of work that people do now has changed how families survive. And it has changed dramatically in the last century. We now have two-income families, which has changed the role of women and their social status and their decision-making. In some ways, globalization has empowered people and families, but in other ways and in other cultures, it has led to disadvantages, increased disadvantages, and destruction. And sometimes people might perceive it as a forced westernization. And that can lead to this violent backlash, like Leroy's talking about, where people want to hold on to their values, those things that are so deep in their families that they grew up with, that are invisible to them. They can't necessarily put their finger on it, but they know something's not right here. And sometimes cultural practices themselves are considered human rights violations. So you have all sorts of things going on here. Globalization has affected family economics, has affected family roles, it's affected power structures, and families have to work to maintain their families and to protect every family member. So as we consider and work to affect changes in policies, we need to be aware that families, we've got globalization, families act as a buffer between these globalizing forces and the choices and challenges that every man, woman, and child within that family face on a daily basis. Trask tells us decisions about employment, migration, marriage, gender roles, and caretaking are subject to family life and local culture. For this reason, family policy needs to be at the forefront of every nation state's agenda. And there was one of our family, that is Bethany when she was little, and her little brother. That was one of our family rituals, was going to the ocean. All right, so look at that, only 3 minutes over. I'm turning the time over to you, Paul.
Great. This was awesome. And I concur with Bethany that it's really nice to see you guys engaging with the discussion through the Zoom. It's we're keeping record of these things, so it's so we encourage you to kind of like share your thoughts in interaction with what's being said. So before we turn things over to Sangeeta, who may need to keep her video off because I don't know if do you have connection issues currently?
I'm okay right now, but I may be, yeah, in about 10, 15 minutes may be an issue. But
Okay.
if my video is off, I'm just trying to deal with bandwidth issues. So,
Gotcha.
but I'm here. I'm hearing everything.
Good. So before we transition to Sangeeta, who's going to be talking about migration, I just want to take a photo, as usual, of everybody. So if you could, so Mulba, Gustavo, Esma, Fatima, Pierre, my mother, if she's willing to just show your faces for a moment, that would be great. So Fatima, Pierre, Tadiwa, etc., and so forth. Simon, please turn on your cameras if you're able to. And I'm going to count to 3. And if you could smile on 3. 1, 2, 3, smile. Awesome. I think I got everybody. Let me take another photo just so that, because I think I've got even more people on their videos. On 3, 1, 2, 3, smile. Perfect. And you get to see my mother. So, all right. All right, everybody. So we are transitioning to Sangeeta.
Hi, everyone. It's nice to be here again. I think some of the faces I recognize. And so, okay, I'm going to, let's share my screen. Right, so what, oh wait, I should actually, can everybody see this? Yes, okay. This is actually going to be quite short because I'm really quite much more interested in hearing what everybody on the call has to say. But I did want to just introduce this topic because I think it's an important one. It actually ties nicely to what we were talking about before, which is sort of rituals, and because this is one of those issues, migration, that both, I think, as somebody said, both disrupts but also allows space to reinvent rituals. And I think this is a critical issue if we're thinking about families. And I imagine everybody on this call, or most people, probably have some experience with families and family members migrating either within the country or regionally or internationally, that has sort of really changed the way you think about family and what gets done, rituals, obligations, all of these issues. So yeah, so what I'm just going to do is just lay out a couple of general issues and to give you a case study of a project I'm working on, and then really I want to hear from everybody because I think this is an important issue. Okay, so we have a situation which there's very, very high unemployment in many, many countries, which necessitates mobility to secure a livelihood, but one that's often not secure enough to accommodate children or other family members. And but however, international and internal migration streams are critical to sustaining family livelihoods, including education and health. And this is something, remittances, which is something I'm sure everybody here is well aware of, is a huge part of some economies, including countries like Somalia. In these migration destinations have changed and are changing, as I think everybody here is well aware of, in response to labor market stuff and where the jobs are. And then also, really importantly, this issue of gender. Migration has become increasingly feminized. I think it used to be a very, very male focused process, but now become much more feminized. And as you all are well aware of, improvement in transportation communication might suggest, leads us to think that perhaps it enables more contact, perhaps even strengthens relationship. But I think there's little doubt that mobility leads to short-term or longer-term disruption in family dynamics, right? So one of the things that I particularly look at are what migration has done to living arrangements of children with migrant parents. And just to give you a little bit of background, we have a fair bit of data right now from transnational migration literature that migrant parents, particularly women, report feeling just sort of feelings of guilt, loneliness, depression, of leaving children behind. So while migration is really needed for a bunch of things, including education, health, it does have costs. And so you see the same thing in a study in the Netherlands with Angola and Nigerian transnational parents. And then in Kenya, where I work, particularly on folks moving within the country, again, particularly women report a lot of concern and significant stress about the well-being of their children, even if they're in the care of close kin. And I think there is also quite a bit of debate, and this is the research that I think I spoke about last week, about exactly kin networks and kinship and their ability to provide childcare, given all the economic stresses and employment challenges. So I promised a quick one, so it's going to be quick. So I just wanted to share with you, last week I talked to you about some work I'm doing in Kenya. I'm also working in South Africa, and this is some work I'm doing with colleagues in the US. South Africa is a case in which there's a long history of labor migration under apartheid, which again, I think probably some of you are quite familiar with, that really, labor migration was critical for particularly Black families to survive. And they had to move from rural communities to urban locations because that's the only employment they had. So, 1994 shows up, there's no longer apartheid, but migration is alive and well. And so one of the questions we're looking at is, what does parenting look like among migrants in South Africa today? And then more specifically, what does this have, is there any effect on sleep? So basically migrant parents' well-being, and we're using sleep, right? And this third question of whether it matters whether you're a female or male migrant. So again, I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail, but just to give you a sense of scale, here's South Africa at the bottom of the African continent. This red dot is sort of where we're starting observation from. And this gives you an idea of scale of like where people are moving to, which is around Johannesburg and where traditional sending areas were, right? And this is just a study that I'm using data from, which is really trying to track. It's like a 5-year study trying to look at what happens to migrants moving from a rural area to this urban community. So we're talking about 3,000 people that we've collected data from. And this just gives you an idea of all the kinds of data they've collected, education, location, health, well-being, family remittances, et cetera. But importantly, also looking at sleep and depression, because there's a lot of interest in looking at what are the health effects for migrants in these kinds of contexts. Again, I think many of you, I imagine on this call, probably have intimate familiarity with this. I'd really be interested to know what your own experience is. So just to share a couple of things, I'm just going to go through this really fast, but I think what I would just want to show here is this 463 number is out of 668 migrants who all have a very young child under the age of 5, the vast majority of them, 463, actually have one of those children living away from them, right? So this is not only is parenting, and it's, by the way, 668 out of sort of a 14, whatever, it's about 1,500 people. So 50% have a young child, right? And most of those have one of these children actually living away from them. So this is not only is migration very, very common, but children living away from them is also quite common. And then just on this issue of sleep that we're looking at, I think, again, these are small numbers, so this is all sort of initial stuff, but just to point out that I think those who have children who are actually living away from them do report having sort of insufficient sleep, compared to both those who don't have any young children or those who have all their kids living with them. And so I think, what this suggests is that the separation of migrant parents and their young children continues to be a common practice for Black African families in South Africa, which is also what I think is going on in other, certainly African countries, and I imagine probably globally. And I think this issue of being physically separated from young children is associated. There seems to be some evidence that this is linked to poor sleep, which could have other issues. So this idea that migration is, always beneficial, I think is something we really need to think about in this kind of context. And finally, that we also found some evidence that women, maybe not surprisingly, are actually more at risk or facing higher risks of inadequate sleep compared to men in the kind of same situation. So I'm really going to really stop there, because what I'd love to just, these are just some questions that I wanted to just throw out to folks on this call, but really, you know, to what extent is migration a necessary part of family economies these days? And many, what are the benefits of migration? What are the costs? And then is there, and what should be the role of the state to mitigate these costs and support family well-being? So I'm going to stop right there, and I'd love to hear from everybody. Thank
Great.
you.
Sangeeta, before people jump in here, and I really appreciate you kind of allowing space for people to have a discussion around this. This is really interesting. First, can you put your questions again in the Zoom chat? So just copy and paste in the Zoom chat. And then secondly, if you could, once you've done that, you can just open it up. You don't have to show your presentation. And then one question I have for you, I guess, just to start things off, you said young children. So when migration happens, I'm confused. I guess I would imagine it's older children who are migrating away from their families in order to find jobs and help support their families. So why would young children be leaving their families?
So I'm talking about parents who, actually, it's not the children that I'm talking about, it's about the parents who have migrated and have young children under the age of 5. So there's some of this old literature in migration that talks about selection, right? So you kind of put off childbearing or don't have young children if you're going to be going away. But I think one of the things I think strongly beginning to suspect, certainly in South Africa and other places, is that, you know, people can't sort of put these other things on hold because of this fairly gamble of migration, which is what it's become. And so that's kind of what we're trying to look at. So I'm not looking at I'm sorry if that wasn't clear, but really about the migrant parents having young children.
Right. So it's migrant parents leaving their families ostensibly for work in order to be able to support their families, and they're leaving at home young children, and that's having a disproportionate impact on women, it appears.
And also sleep. So we wanted to kind of test this idea that somehow, you know, the benefits clear outweigh this, but we wanted to see if there's any kind of link about the issues that parents, I think parenting, everything has always taken a backseat to employment and economic benefits of migration. And I think we're trying to actually push that a little bit to say, no, actually, migrants are just like any of us, also have a wide range of agenda items, including children. And which again, so I think that's what we're trying to complexify a bit.
Great. So Ite Shansar, if you could, you have your hand raised. Yes, and remind us where you're calling us from, where you're coming from, what city and country.
I'm from Zimbabwe, by the way, but currently I'm in South Africa. So I just wanted to note on the issue of parenting when it comes to the family issue. Because the things are changing, I just wanted to note on the areas that my sister was sharing about the employment and unemployment of many people are leaving their houses, and we have many kids who are struggling out there. They left their parents, and the issue of parenting here in Africa, you know, South Africa is one of the largest countries that so many nations are in there. So there's a great confusion when it comes to the cultures, because when other countries come and other nations comes into South Africa, they bring in their cultures. So there's a great confusion of cultures. So for the issue of parenting, people are absent in their homes, trying to find something to survive. So this is the greatest challenge that we people are facing. So my question is, what is the impact of globalization, especially when it comes to when things are changing?
Sangeeta?
Do you want me to respond individually or just do you want to go through other questions or?
No.
or what do you
Go
wanna-
ahead and respond. Go ahead and respond to Mutai.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a big one that I'm definitely not going to be able to answer fully. But I think, I mean, it's a bit of a now old news, right? That we all know that, you know, globalization is alive and well, and it is changing. I think the previous speakers also alluded to this, all of our ideas about rituals and everything, and some would say bad ways, some would say good ways, it depending on how you see these things. I mean, I think migration is part and parcel of globalization. I mean, that is one of the things that fuels globalization. And it's also one of these things that, if you go back to older debates about, you know, particularly poorer countries servicing the richer countries through globalization migration streams, this must be old news to many people on this Zoom call. So, you know, I can't sort of make a sort of definitive statement on what globalization is doing, but no doubt. And again, whether it's bad or good is a very, very complicated question that I don't think I could answer. We're just trying to take one tiny little piece of it in one country to kind of try to see what these kinds of movement by parents and children, does it have any effect, and what it's doing. So.
Sammy, who's joining us from Pakistan. Go ahead, Sammy.
Okay, hello. I hope you all guys are doing well, and thank you so much, sir. So, to what extent is migration necessary for part of family economics? So, I would like to answer this question. Like, it's, I would say, I would give my own example. Like for most of the countries, Asian countries, they have less economy, and their economy status is not that much higher, and they are not affordable to give jobs to their citizens. So, like for example, I will give you the example of Asian countries such as Pakistan and India, like that. So, if migration is very necessary for the students, that they are very intellectual and they can do well, but they don't have the basically the support from the government and the support from their own state. So according to that, if he migrates to a developed country, so he can do well and more, in a sense of he can do a kind of business, and a kind of he can, like I would say, he can perform well in his education, because it depends when the economy of the state is not that much stable. So the state is not, I would say, state is not in a supportive mood, that they can't support their students or their citizen. So in that case, it is very necessary to migrate to developed country, and to even in adaptation of culture. Like if a student, or if a citizen of the another state, if he visits to somewhere another state, so he can easily adopt things and adopt new cultures to promote their own culture there. So up to that extent, I think migration is very necessary. Thank you so much.
And just to follow up, Sammy, on what you said, I'm wondering, given the concerns about the impact of migration on family, in your experience in Pakistan, do people who leave Pakistan for education or work, do they tend to come back and then have their families in Pakistan, or do they stay, let's say, in these, I prefer to say, richer or more wealthier countries than developed, because I mean, it's, I guess, developed, you got to wonder what the heck developed means. But I wonder, like, do they stay in your experience, from the people that you know, the families that you know, and the friends that you have, if they get the chance to move to England, or move to Germany, or to the United States, and do they come back, or do they stay there?
Yeah, I understand your question. It's a bit tricky. Like I would say, migration for those students that they want to study, and they want to build their personality, to build their wealth, economy, status. So you are saying like they can bake. So it depends on their own mentality, and it depends on their ritual and their patriotism for their country. Like for some states, there are like I can estimate it from my own university, and Abdul Khan University. There are some students that they are not patriotic about their country. They are not loving at that level. So they think like if I can support, if I'm doing hard work in another state, so that is my own state. Like I would like to say one of the quotation of my favorite scientist is Albert Einstein. He said that I'm not a citizen of the state, I'm the citizen of the world. So in my perspective, I'm not a citizen of the state, I'm a citizen of the world. So in everywhere where I can build my personality, where I can proceed well and do good in my life, so I would stay there. But when it depends to my family, it has an impact. Like our family, they are extended family, and we love to live together. We love to have fun together. So that's the kind like, and in that sense, we will have to come back for our parents, for our sisters, daughters, brothers. So in that sense, yeah, we will come back. But if according to me, if my life is getting secure in a different state, so I would choose that. I would choose to make myself more brilliant in things, and to make my own personality well. So if I'm stable, so this is my own like mentality. Like if I get stable there, if I get like I'm a photographer, so if I do well there and I earn a wealth for my family and economically I get stable, then I will definitely come back to Pakistan. So yeah.
Okay. Sammy, that's helpful. Before we go on to Tennille, so we've got Tennille, Bell, Rosella, and Mulba, and then Esma. But I'm actually, there's somebody on this conversation who is in fact living in another country, and as mentioned in the Zoom chat, is in fact sending money back to his country, and that's Marvin, who lives in Minnesota in the United States. He's a teacher there, but his family's back in China. And so I'm wondering, what Sammy said in Pakistan is there's a sense of, for him, a sense of patriotism is attached to it, that patriotic people who go abroad because of requirements for work or educational opportunity will come back if they're patriotic and they love their family. But I wonder how you respond to that, Marvin, because I don't know, that, yeah, just if you could respond to that. It's kind of, yeah.
All right, thank you, Paul. That's a very good question. I do believe I love my country so much. Eventually, I do want to do something for my country, for my people, so I can help them to get to a better condition. But right now, I do feel living here in the US, work here, or even I'm going after for a PhD. So I'm thinking I'm still improving myself. So also, I do have to consider like what kind of education, what kind of family ritual I want to pass down to my son. What kind of a new culture or new experience I want to add to his life. So I do think having him here in the US, having some education here will help him to be more global thinking, global thoughts, and to be more open-minded, especially for his future. If he can, number one, have very good English language skills, and also learn some of the culture here that will help him for his future. But I do still want him to have the Chinese family ritual, the identification there. So combining, I do have my own plan to have my own country like China, in some way, but also I want to, make sure I can help my own son grow too. So it's a combination of both my own career, my own plan, and also my son's life. So that's why I'm still planning to stay in the US to learn, to improve, and to help my son grow. But eventually, I do want to, go back to China, help China some way.
Yeah, and I guess, you guys are probably aware of this, but I think there's an important tension here between seeking and seizing economic opportunities and maintaining to some extent family cohesion or family unity. Obviously, if you've got to be abroad, Marvin, yeah, I don't want to share, but it clearly the pandemic had a big impact on your family. And
Yes.
your family is no longer the same because of it. So, and that's in part because, well, you're part of your family was in China and you were here. And that just kind of changed things. So, and the pandemic itself is part of globalization, right? It wouldn't be possible if
Yeah.
people weren't flying in planes, spreading disease.
Mhm.
Anyway,
Well, Paul,
yeah.
I just wanted to thank Marvin for sharing that, because in some sense, I think that piece really probably brought to light some of the issues I was trying to make in my presentation. And he's clearly someone who knows this better than anybody, that migration has both a benefit and a cost. And I think he's just exactly articulated that in what he was just saying. So I just wanted to say that that's exactly the kind of the complication that migration and globalization introduce for family life. So
yeah. Tennille, and if you could, Tennille, tell us where you are and where you're from.
I am in, hi, good day, everybody. Thank you so much for those great presentations. I'm in Berlin, Germany, and I'm from Trinidad and Tobago in the Caribbean, which is right next to Venezuela. Having heard the presentations, I'm thinking that the role of families and the responsibility of them, it's like more important now than before, because I'm reminded of one of the presentations from Bethany on intergenerational transmission. And I'm thinking if like traditions and values and all these things is what is the foundation of families. And as Denise says, we need to find that right sweet spot. But with globalization and migration, it's constantly changing and the variables are constantly making it imbalanced. And because of that now, especially with migration, I'm thinking like, I don't know how or what else families could do to kind of ensure that they need to be quote unquote aggressive in trying to maintain like their culture because it's their identity. And to like quickly just go through the questions, I think that migration is necessary for families that probably became more necessary for those that are the asylum seekers and refugees, those that are running away from war. The benefits to migration could be as simple as like peace of mind, food, clothing, shelter, because they're running away. One of my friends is a refugee, and just peace of mind, just waking up a morning and realizing you don't have to escape a bomb, or you don't have to be fighting food, as well as job opportunities and that kind of stuff. And to me, the cost of migration could be a diluted identity, because you're into a new country, learning a new language, learning the value system, trying to normalize and integrate, but at the same time too, in order to like value added, in order to be better in one, it minimizes the other. You might speak your national tongue less and that kind of stuff. And sometimes you're like, oh, how did they say this in English again? Because you're trying to integrate with another culture. And the role of the state, I think it's kind of touchy, because the more you give them the responsibility to make decisions when it comes to families, it's like power. Nobody wants to give away the power that they have. So the minute that you give them the opportunity to make decisions, it's like you're giving away your power. And then after a while, you realize, well, what started off as like a draft procedure is now becoming like they're telling you now what families should do and how you should be governed and how decisions that you should be made. So I think it should probably vary by by country or by state in the first instance. And from there, you could be able to realize, okay, where we could find the balance to what government should and should not do. Because if it's something across the board, it might be more like a dictatorship or something like that. Yeah, but thank you very much.
Tennille, do you want to speak to your own experience? Because you've come from Trinidad and Tobago, you're pursuing a master's in Germany. And what do you want to do afterwards? Because my understanding from conversations you and I have had is that your parents would love for you to come back and stay close. But what are your plans?
Strange enough, just my aunt spoke to me today and she's like, you're not coming back. So it's like, it's a constant thing no matter your age. And I think it's because the tradition, or like something that my family always held close to them, is having your kids and your family close by. So the minute that you go somewhere that is out of their familiarity zone, which is maybe Canada, US, or the UK, they're like, why are you there? You could study somewhere else. In my first instance, I wanted to do my PhD and further my study at Caribbean studies. But I think I'll just take a break. I get a job, like work with an NGO or something like that. But my experience so far, because I think me as an individual, I'm open to culture and then also have a sense of national pride. I don't want to give up me being a Trinidadian. I love my Trinidadian food and everything, but at the same time too, I'm comfortable in my culture. So when I meet another culture, I'm open to receive and understand what that culture is and learn about it. But at the same time too, my culture is my identity. So it's at my very core. So even if I'm in a different country, I'm not just going to switch and forget who I came from. But for some people who may not be proud of their culture, their country, or they might say, okay, they look at my culture and they think I'm a terrorist. Like, I don't want to be associated with my culture, but something like that. So it varies. So for countries, for instance, we all know Jamaicans have a strong sense of national pride. Like, they don't care what country they're in. The accent is as thick as it gets. So for me, yes, I will go and visit my country, be back and forth. But I think that's where it comes when you come from a communal country and you're individualist and into an individualistic society. You have to remember, yes, while I come from a community, that I'm also an individual. It's not like either or, I am both. Yeah. So yeah, so here I am in a foreign country. I'm learning their culture and everything, but at the same time too, I know who I am, you know. So that's how it is for me.
And by the way, so Bethany, Denise, and Sangeeta, feel free to chime in here if you want to kind of help to, yeah.
Maybe could I just, I think to Neil's point, by the way, last week I appreciated your comments, so thanks again for some great comments. I just wanted to just a little bit to say that I don't think it's kind of an either or. This idea that you're sort of completely losing this and it's being taken over by this. I think, my understanding is, even without any migration at all, places are changing, rituals are changing. None of this is fixed, and it's changing over time. It's changing over whatever. So, I think I personally think it's. I'm an immigrant myself, so I know this quite well. In trying to actually. There is no sort of, this idea of sort of, loss and gain, I think is a very, very simplistic way to look at this. Cultures and new rituals and ideas are constantly being recreated, even without, even within the communities in which we live. And so I just wanted to say to Neil that not to sort of be very, while migration and globalization are driven by economic imperatives, I don't necessarily think it has to be the situation in which it's like all or nothing. And I think there are some really interesting ways in people are specifically actually taking the best of all these worlds to create something richer. Thank you.
Yeah, and it sounds like Tennille is doing just that. But I think what's interesting in what you mentioned, Tennille, is this tension between, you said, I'm still an individual, but yes, I'm part of my culture. And that individual part of you, right, is seeking opportunity in Germany to advance your education that's not available and as much as you'd like in Trinidad and Tobago. So there is this kind of tension between collectivism, you might say, and individualism that's oftentimes kind of mentioned. I think in fact Denise and Bethany mentioned this, right, that in family and in modern life there is this, and it's felt and expressed through family and kind of family separation and family coming back together, is this tension between this collectivism and individualism. So anyway, Belle,
can I say
yes.
something real quick too? Listening to Tennille and others, my grandparents came here from different countries. They didn't speak the language. My grandfather only spoke Polish to me. And my husband's family, half of them were born in Mexico and half of them were born in the US, and they went back and forth. And I can tell you that 1, 2, 3 generations, those migrations are still felt. And they're felt in different ways. I don't think that I would have started the businesses I started. I would have go to university the way I went to university, had it not been from the things that I think were passed down to me as a result of some of those migrations. And I think that goes back into what Bethany was saying about narratives and stories and hope that gets passed down. Bethany has this wonderful discussion. She's going to be all embarrassed. She did like a TED talk on hope and hope DNA and the belief that that can be passed down from one generation to the next. I'm sorry, I don't mean to talk too much. I will turn the time over to the rest.
Yeah, and Bethany, by the way, it'd be great if you we did post your talk. I don't know if you noticed, to our Family Diplomacy Initiative page, which has now 12,000 people, but would love for you to actually share it, because I think people now knowing you will be more likely to watch it. So if you could share it to the chat, that would be great. It is a really nice story, and it's, by the way, helpful in part because, you know, the second part of this training is, in fact, each of us kind of developing a family story, and you're going to be able to perform that stories in front of an audience. And so I think it's a good example of a story to tell. Belle, who, if you can tell us, because I know in your case you're in the United States, but you're from elsewhere, North Macedonia, if I remember correctly last time. But if you could just tell us where you are and where you're from, and then give your comment or question.
Thank you. I also would like to briefly share my story, but I'm hoping that it can add to the presentation, because those are some really big questions, and I love the thoughts that people have been sharing. So I've moved, in terms of migration, I was born in Albania, and I moved a bunch of times within Albania. When I was 7, my mother and I had to leave, and because there was a war in Albania in 1997. And so we went as refugees in Italy, my mother and I. And then in Italy, I also moved a bunch of times, at least 10 times throughout the northeast of Italy. There, however, I experienced a lot of, I don't know, never really accepted because of my origins. And a lot of hate speech, assaults on the street, simply because I'm Albanian, not Italian. And I was just tired of it. And so 10 years later, I moved by myself to the United States, and I went through these other 12 years in the US, where, you know, I finished high school, bachelor's, master's, fellowships, now PhD, work, right? And if you ask me, or even if you don't ask me, how do I define myself? The very first thing I say is I'm a migrant, because I'm proud of that. And this is a very special and important topic for me. And it's the theme of my dissertation as well. And I look at it through the lens of the function of religious identity and national identity. And so what does that mean when you compare it and contrast it to the hosting country, right? And so when we speak, my mom, she has a Italian partner right now, and he always has this comment that he said, but how do you, when he says you, he means plural, he means migrants. He says, where do you get the guts to just go for it? How can you think of just, I will make this move and I will do this thing, right? And we smile about it, and we understand that it's a strength, and yet it comes with so much burden. It comes with so much pain, and it comes with a lot of baggage. Today I feel both very, personally enriched because of my experiences, and yet in a way kind of uprooted. Where's home? where do I feel well? For the past 2 years, I've been living here in Macedonia, which is not my culture, is not my language, right? And here I am yet again, uprooting myself. It's a lot to think about. And one thing that strikes me is that migration, for how I see it and understand it, is that it did start, regulations of a country do start because of, fundamentally, it was economic competition. You don't want to just let barriers down because you want the people of your country to get access to those jobs or money and what have you. And so that's why we have very strict migration systems in some countries, right? And yet, what about dignity? What about human dignity, right? Why, not why, but, you know, in a couple of instances, I had to move because of war. Another one was because of security and dignity. And so I don't know, what do we do with all of this? And where is the health dimension to migration? So not only looking at how the migrant goes through these processes, right? The state processes, international processes, personal, community-wise, cultural ones, but also at the heart of it. How does it change us? What do we need? How can we foster the some of these wonderful things that migration really does bring?
Belle, thank you. In the interest of time, I'm going to have just, and unfortunately, there are a number of you that want to contribute, and we're essentially at time. I do want to allow, because we haven't heard from Rosella in a while. She wasn't here in the last meeting, she was here in the prior meeting, but it just so happens you had spent some time in Northern Italy. Rosella comes from Southern Italy, but perhaps she can comment on, it sounds like you had a bad experience in Northern Italy, you were not accepted, but she can perhaps comment on that. But would love to hear from Rosella, and then we'll have to stop for today, but we will be continuing next week. Rosella.
Yeah, actually, I was writing the answer about that. Writing like I'm sorry that you didn't feel welcomed. I feel like Italian has to still learn how to welcome people, unfortunately. And I think this migrant crisis started in 2014 just exacerbate it. I don't know if you heard about it, but unfortunately, this last week, an Italian man killed a Nigerian man out of no reason. I guess because there is underneath hate that is growing just because of the migration crisis that invested Italy. I don't know about Albanian people, but I think even because Albanian, even there was a migration from Albanian even to search work in Italy in the past. And I think even this kind of hate is related to that, because there is always this kind of misconception that people from abroad just steal our work, even though I cannot explain that, because Italians are famous even to migrate abroad, like in Germany, for instance. Even my grandfather migrated in Germany to find better work conditions, and so even in the US, his family even is famous, even the flow of Italian migrants that just went to the US. So I'm really sorry to hear that you were not that welcome and you experienced bad feelings and bad experience from Italian. Yeah.
I was always told the South is more welcoming. So maybe
that's true. I didn't
North.
want to say, but it's true. The North is not so welcoming. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, but I have a lot of friends from Albania, and it's crazy how you guys can understand us because of the language you were born with and grow up with our cartoons, Italian cartoons. But unfortunately, I understand little from Albania. Yeah.
Yeah. But well, at least you guys get to meet here, and I think part of the value to me of these conversations is it helps to humanize I mean, I think we all come to this more open-minded, right? People who are kind of more closed-minded are not going to come to these conversations typically. Although, of course, if you have people that you do know who are more closed-minded, by all means, encourage them to attend, because I think part of the value of hearing your perspectives, but also hearing your stories, is that it helps to humanize us. And so that's, I think, you know, part of the reason why we're focusing on storytelling as a first skill of development as developing as family diplomats is we need to be able to get even better at telling family stories so that we can help to humanize people and, you know, hopefully try to mitigate these situations where, you know, Italian man kills in broad daylight on camera, kills I gather an Algerian or Nigerian man. Is Nigerian?
Nigerian,
Yeah,
yes, indeed.
yeah. So given that we know Nigerians, in fact, there are Nigerians in on this conversation, it's particularly poignant. So anyway, I really want to thank these conversations have just been awesome. And I really want to, even though we've gone a little over time, I wanted to get Rosela's perspective. I really appreciate the richness of the conversation. I think you guys widely recognize this. It's really awesome to hear from different people and also to learn in the process. Sangeeta had to go right at 1:30, but she thanked you guys for your thoughts. And Bethany and Denise, thank you so much. You've been really helpful. Bethany, I'm actually thinking we need to have you back in part because of your storytelling, you're focused on storytelling. So I'm going to reach out to you after this and kind of talk about it and see if you might be available for a couple of sessions. I think these would be in September, but we'll see, because I know that classes resume then and you're busy with 4 or 5 kids, 4 kids?
6.
Oh, 6. Never mind. Yes. So 6 kids. So anyway, thanks to everybody. Thanks, Denise and Bethany, for really, really helping out to help us kind of get a richer understanding of what's happening to families and how to better understand families. See you all next Sunday, same time.
Goodbye.
Bye, everybody.